Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I've Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And if you're listening to this when it comes out, I have been absent.
She's been gone.
For about a week because I got jury duty. I was selected. I served on a jury. If we have time, I'm going to talk about it at the end. If we don't have time, I'll talk about it in a Monday Mini because I learned a lot, everyone. it was a really intense, fascinating experience. I've been summoned to jury duty before, but this was the first time I've been chosen to serve on jury duty. And it happened very suddenly because I had pushed it off. You get one deferral that is not related to, they have kind of a set of reasons that you can just defer. Then you have one, you can just say, like, this is not a good time for me. And I did it because I got summoned when we were going to be in Seattle. So I deferred it. And then it came up again.
That was so quick turnaround, too.
It was a quick
turnaround.
It was a quick turnaround. And I was like, oh, this is actually not a good time for me either, which I'm sure is what everyone says. But they were like, nope, you used up your one deferral. You're coming back. And this episode is kind of timely in a couple ways, although as I was researching this, it's not as timely as I thought because there were a couple cases that happened around women serving on jury duty on like Halloween, but it was like very specific. So it's not as timely as I got really excited about when I was researching. But yeah, we have been, I feel like I have been traveling, busy doing stuff since June. And then you were sick, Samantha, and then this jury duty thing happened. And so if I'm a little rusty, that is why. But yeah, one of the things that I will say is interesting about this is I have never made it past. Essentially, what happens is you get a letter. And it says you've been summoned, and it gives you the date and time and all of that. I went in. Last time I was summoned, the case got settled before even a jury had been chosen. So I thought that I had served jury duty and it just got settled, but that is not what happened. This time, I made it to the interview stage, obviously, perhaps, but you know, that's when they ask you their questions if they're trying to see, do we want this person on our jury? And they asked me about the podcasting, Samantha. Yeah. And they were like, well, what are your podcasts about? And I have to say, I said it was an intersectional feminist podcast. I did not do the thing we usually do, or I usually do, where I'm like, it's women's issues. Because I was like, no, one, they could look it up, but two, I'm going to be clear. I'm clear about this. But they did ask me a lot of questions about my closeness or proximity to true crime podcast, which makes sense.
Did you tell them we had like at least episodes about it and why women love them?
I did not bring that up. If they had asked
about the
me,
episode. You should just talked about the episode the whole time.
I said that I was truthful. If anyone is listening, I have provided voices for true crime podcasts before, usually as a favor to a friend of ours that we work with. But I've never been involved in scripting them or writing them, creating them, anything like that. But anyway, I ended up getting chosen. And I do want to say for this episode, which we're going to be talking about the history of women and jury duties in the United States, we are focusing on those things, women in the United States, because there are and have been a lot of questions around should we even have juries, because we can't remove the toxic, racist, sexist, homophobic, ableist soup that we're all raised in. But then again, other people argue, like, is it better to trust judges alone? Some argue that we don't need to do away with juries. We just need to do a better job of making sure they are representative. I will say I think mine was pretty representative. again. If I have time, I'll talk about it at the end. And I also, like, you have to take notes during it. And there's no transcripts. So you take these notes, and it even came up in closing arguments where one of the attorneys, they were both women, by the way. One of them is famous. But they were both women, and it came up at the end. One of them said something that was incorrect. And I had written down the actual true statement. But the judge said, I hope they wrote it down, because they don't provide that for you. And essentially, they give you the laws to read, and you read them and try to apply them to the evidence that you have. So I can see that. Even to me, I was like, I'm really tired, and this law doesn't make sense to me. And you're asking, like, somebody's life is in my hands at this current juncture, and I'm so tired. So I see the arguments all around it. Also, just to throw this out here, there are juror scams that are happening right now. Here's a quote from the Fulton County website. Do not pay money or transfer money to cards or wires over the phone for missed jury duty to anyone claiming to be a sheriff's deputy. Which I happened to hear somebody going through. She was crying. She was at the court and she was crying. She's like, I am here. And I went through this person and all of this. Because you can and will get in trouble for not showing up. Yes. So it sounded like she had fallen victim to one of these scams. So,
oh no.
Be aware that is a thing. Yes. But okay, let us just briefly go over the definition of jury duty. From Merriam-Webster, quote, service on a jury, a group of people who make a decision in a legal case. So the lawyers present their cases, their evidence. Usually the burden is on the state to prove it. And then the judge instructs you on the law. He instructs the jurors on the law. You have to apply to the evidence, and then you go deliberate and you talk about it and you decide. From the official federal website, quote, jurors listen to testimony, review evidence, and render decisions in civil and criminal trials. Most U.S. citizens who are 18 or older may serve on a federal jury. Quote, being summoned for jury service does not mean that a person will end up serving on a jury. When a jury is needed for a trial, a group of qualified jurors who reported to court in response to the jury summons is taken to the courtroom where the trial will take place. The judge and attorneys ask the potential jurors questions, general or related to the specific case before them, to determine their suitability to serve on the jury. The process is called voir dire, which typically results in some prospective jurors being excused based on their answers from serving in that trial. The attorneys also may exclude a certain number of jurors without giving a reason. Also, it varies by state. So to be eligible in Georgia, for example, you have to be a U.S. citizen, be at least 18 years old, be proficient in English enough to understand and discuss the case, be a resident of the county that sent you the jury summons, have not served on a jury for the last 12 months. So, hey, I got a year. Not currently be on a grand jury or another trial jury, not be under conservatorship, have had your civil rights restored if you were convicted of a felony or malfeasance while holding public office. And that, I'm assuming, I know assuming is dangerous, but I'm assuming that's pretty much what most states are. The juries can look different. So the one I was on was 14 jurors with 2 alternates, but there are also other makeups, like 6 with 1 alternate or 2 alternate. And boy, were we looking up those alternates. Because essentially, the alternates, you don't know you're an alternate. And you listen to the whole case. And then at the end, you're told you're an alternate. You don't deliberate, but you're supposed to. They don't want you to.
You don't know if you're an alternate? That I didn't know. So you didn't know the whole time whether or not you were an alternate, were you?
No. And no. Oh, I was crossing my fingers because I'm a coward and it was a murder case, everybody. But essentially, they don't want anyone to know they're an alternate, so you pay the same attention.
That's fair.
But then they announce it right before the jury goes to deliberate who the alternates are, and they're to come in if something happens. However, our alternates wanted to deliberate. And
really?
They asked the judge if we could swap out, because there were plenty of people that were like, I'm good. You want to take my spot? It's fine. And he said he'd never been asked that question before. But the answer was no.
People were like, no, me. Let me do this.
Yeah,
wow.
They were invested. They were both very invested, but I don't know. Maybe they'll never know. So that's kind of the basic outline of what it looks like today. But if we look back historically, it's gone through a lot of changes. I saw a lot of conflicting information about the start of jury duty, which, again, we're kind of focusing on the West and the U.S. But the story goes that the right to trial by jury started in England in 1215 CE, though there were similar practices happening earlier than that. Many of them excluded women, though, and a lot of it had to do with things around owning property, which most women couldn't, having the right to vote, which most women couldn't, these requirements that just women couldn't meet because of the law. So that meant that they couldn't serve on juries. There were some exceptions, though, going as far back as several hundred years. In England, all women juries of matrons, were tasked with figuring out whether or not women facing the death penalty, usually, were pregnant. Because if they were exempt from the death penalty and got a lesser sentence. This was called pleading the belly.
That's very specific.
It is, right? Enter the all-women juries. They were considered medical experts. They were consulted about inheritance claims. They examined women for signs of witchcraft, and they provided testimony. And in 1798, the first instance of an English-style jury system in Australia consisted of a women-only jury. So they inherited a lot of that from England. But yeah, with the burgeoning of male medical professionals and things like the stethoscope, these matrons and women-only juries faded away. Legal scholar Alicia Simmons wrote in 2021 that by the 1800s, people were starting to suspect women jurors were, quote, too irrational, too burdened by suckling infants, too sexually ignorant, or too easily corrupted by sexual knowledge. So, yeah, I know, right?
I feel like that's all the things. Like,
yeah.
You're just too human.
We don't trust.
I don't think I like this.
You know too much.
You've seen too much.
Right.
You birthed children. No, thank you.
We don't like that. Stay home with the kids. We'll decide these cases, which is essentially what happened, and we'll break that down. But it wasn't until 1997 that women secured the same juror rights as men across all of Australia. So, historically in the U.S., women have been shut out of jury duty, allegedly because this aspect of public life was too intense for women's delicate sensibilities. Plus, women just not having the same rights as men in general.
Even still. So from the ACLU has worked over the years to remove barriers to women serving on juries. Under English common law, which was the basis for early American law, women, except in a small category of cases, were deemed unfit to serve on juries under the doctrine of propter defectum sexus, a defective sex. I call myself a defective sex all the time.
I guess that's a positive. I don't know.
It's a thing.
It's a thing. But
according to them, anyway.
Yes. And this legal argument was used for a long time, defective sex. In 1879, the Supreme Court in the United States determined that race-based disqualifications from jury duty were illegal, but affirmed that states could keep their jury choices to men and exclude women. However, a few states made laws allowing for women to serve. Utah was the first state to rule that women were capable and eligible for jury duty in 1898. Also, plenty of states blatantly did exclude Black people, to be clear. A lot of this came from the voir dire jury selection process, which basically allowed people to make decisions based on stereotypes. So even if it's like illegal to do that, people still did it. Yes. Also, women were sometimes called illegally anyway. So I read a couple of I'll say fun, stories about women in smaller towns where they just didn't have a lot of people. And we're like, yeah, it doesn't matter if it's illegal. We'll call in the women. And in some places, women could hold positions in the judicial system, but not serve as jurors. Jumping ahead to the early 1900s, in the U.S., women were popular in some states as jurors for prohibition violation cases. Places like New York had legislations allowing for female jurors that kept getting stalled and dismissed with claims that the state wasn't ready for something, quote, so experimental. Ooh. The UK passed the Sex Disqualification Removal Act in 1919, but women were excused from shocking cases. In 1921, the Louisiana Constitution was updated with, quote, no woman shall be drawn for jury service unless she shall have previously filed with the clerk of the district court a written declaration of her desire to be subject to such service. So essentially, a woman had to do an extra step to serve on jury duty. She had to know about it and have the initiative go do this thing, which of course means that there were less women serving. And there's a lot of legal fights that we're going to get into around this idea, because essentially the argument was that doesn't meet the requirements of a jury, that it should be something that gives a point of view of like everybody. Women jurors were allowed to serve in some districts, though. As you know, this whole time is when women in the U.S. were getting the right to vote. Many suffragettes believed they'd get the right to serve on juries, like with the right to vote. But that didn't happen. By 1927, only 19 states had passed laws sanctioning women's presences on juries.
Yeah, in a 1927 edition of the Women's Lawyer's Journal, Bernita Shelton Matthews wrote, since the adoption of women's suffrage, women have arrived, so to speak, and are demanding the why and wherefore of their exclusion from jury service. Evidently, they were not satisfied with the reasoning of the great English jurist, Sir William Blackstone. He held that the common law requires jurors to be free and trustworthy human beings, and that while the term human beings means man and women, the female is, however, excluded on account of the defect of sex. If it be, as Blackstone says, a defect of sex, that bars women from the jury box. The women claim that the defect lies in the masculine, not the feminine ranks. Are women to be jurors or not to be? That is a question now confronting many state legislators. If there's one subject which all the women's organizations are agreed upon, it is probably jury service by women. So, with the women's cities clubs, the women's bar associations, the Women's Party, and many other feminine regiments camping on their trail, the lawmakers may as well prepare for a battle royale. So, one picture which is often conjured up is of a mother being dragged off to jury duty while someone sings to the crying baby, nice little baby, don't get in a fury. Mama, it may be, must sit on the jury.
Yes. So this was a really, I recommend reading this article because this woman was coming for them. She was mad.
I was like,
she wanted.
That's how I read that in my head. Everything was in sarcasm, dripping with sarcasm.
Oh, she was mad.
She was like, let's go.
But this quote, the like kind of little rhyme, was something that was essentially women should stay home with their children, and that's why they shouldn't serve on a jury. A Michigan circuit judge wrote, as quoted in this article, "The women have brought to the juries an element of sincerity, honesty, and righteousness which was not present in the same extent before. I would no more think of going back to the exclusive men jury system of the past than I would of advising that home ought to be managed and run without the influence of women. The change has been greatly beneficial, and what is more remarkable is that it has worked no inconvenience nor harm." The article also includes quotes from judges citing the eagerness of women to serve compared to men. They were like, women want to do it, men don't want to do it. But to be clear, the author goes on to make the point that Black men could serve, but white women couldn't, which we see over and over again. But that was one of the reasons she was real mad. A California case in 1946 led to a Supreme Court ruling that federal juries in states that allowed women to serve on jury duty must include them in the jury pool to represent a, quote, cross-section of the community. But it did not apply to states where women were not permitted to serve. At least a few cases were appealed because there were no women on the jury.
Mm-hmm. So a justice wrote about this whole situation. The legislature still has the power to prescribe the qualifications of jurors and to impose this burden upon men alone if it sees fit so to do. It is not contended that juries composed of men would be less fair to women defendants than would juries composed of women. Indeed, experience would lead to a contrary conclusion. The spirit of chivalry and of deep respect for the rights of the opposite sex have not yet departed from the heads and hearts of the men of this country. Oh, men are too nice.
Anyway, women got the right to serve on federal juries with the 1957 Civil Rights Act. All 50 states didn't pass similar legislation until 1973, though. Also, 1957 is the same year the film 12 Angry Men came out, all about men on a jury that is named that for a reason. It was really in the 1960s that this issue gained a lot of traction and attention. At the time, a lot of the arguments were that women needed to stay home, that they had too much going on managing the family and cooking and caring for their kids, and they didn't need the extra pressure or burden of jury duty. Up until the 1960s, women in Alabama, South Carolina, and Mississippi couldn't serve on juries. Other states had gender-based barriers to service, like requiring women to register with the clerk of court if they wanted to serve, like we said. In 1961, the Supreme Court heard and sustained the conviction of a woman in Florida, tried by an all-male jury. If I'm remembering correctly, it was second-degree murder. At the time, Florida has stipulations around women serving on juries. The court found that it did not violate the 14th Amendment and that there was not enough evidence to prove discrimination, so the appeal was dismissed.
So here's a part of what they wrote about their decision. Despite the enlightened emancipation of women from the restrictions and protections of bygone years and their entry into many parts of community life formerly considered to be reserved to men, woman is still regarded as the center of home and family life. We cannot say that it is constitutionally impermissible for a state acting in pursuit of the general welfare to conclude that a woman should be relieved from the civic duty of jury service, unless she herself determines that such service is consistent with her own special responsibilities.
Special responsibilities.
All them special responsibilities.
In 1968, Judge George Dittrich said of 6 women serving on the Antelope County jury in Nebraska, quote, "This is a special occasion since this is the first time in the history of Antelope County that a jury has been impaneled consisting of both men and women. This is further evidence of the progress of the day and age in which we live." This, despite the fact that women obtained the right to serve jury duty in Antelope County in 1943. So again, just because legally women or marginalized people could serve, there were obstacles and methods of keeping them out. But I think that happened on Halloween. I think that was the one I got really excited. Like,
oh.
Yeah, timing wise.
Got you. It's Halloween. Yeah. It's a horror story, baby.
Yes. Wow. other reasons that were often given for keeping women out. I'm sure they won't be a surprise. So let's go through a few of them. They were too delicate for the details of the cases, especially sex offenses, which would, quote, shock the moral sensibilities. Here's another quote. Juries deal with all manner of crimes, from innocuous offenses to the vilest and most revolting aberrations of the human beast. Their educations, their habits of mind, their points of view have not prepared women to deal with such cases.
But oftentimes the victims were women. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Sure. From a 1966 Mississippi case, courts have, quote, a right to exclude women to protect them in some areas. They are still upon a pedestal from the filth, obscenity, and noxious atmosphere that so often pervades a courtroom during a jury trial. Once again.
Another reason popularly given is that they would be too sympathetic, that they wouldn't be able to convict. Multiple judges and lawyers wrote about this at the time and what they called false sympathy. One attorney argued that women were too soft. Yeah, here's a quote. A Philadelphia judge writes that he had one woman on a murder jury last winter that brought in a verdict of first degree in the case of another woman. She had deliberately shot her sweetheart, and the woman juror served notice on her 11 male companions that the time for such practices had passed. Well, damn. Lot to unpack there. From an 1870 Wisconsin case, women know, quote, nothing of the dangers besetting men sometimes and the conditions under which men are sometimes compelled to slay in defense of their own lives. Reading about this, though, I have to say, I don't really know what to make of it either way, but I don't think this bared out because a lot of the examples that were used, women did convict, and I don't know if they felt like they had to.
Right.
Or I don't know what it was, but this was not panning out. Also, another reason given, that they would support lawlessness if it helped their community. It wouldn't be a good idea for them to be in close contact with male jurors, especially for a long time. Interestingly, men were assumed to be softer on women defendants, which I'm like, okay, so that's okay.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, that's what the earlier quotes were like. Yeah, they're too nice. Men just, they still too gentlemanly to convict a woman. So what? The what?
Yeah. It doesn't match up.
Yeah. Is it or isn't it?
Right. And again, this matters for a lot of reasons, but one of the big ones is there are a lot of cases of all white juries vindicating Ku Klux Klan violence. So, like, it's important who gets selected for these juries. A lot of lawsuits followed in the ensuing years against exemptions. For example, one, the ACLU filed against an exemption for any, quote, housewife with children under 14 years old. And I think that was in Georgia. Exemptions for women were viewed as violating both women's rights and the rights of the defendant to a fair cross-section of the county guaranteed in the Sixth Amendment. And there was some sexism involved in getting women the right to do jury duty too, because, yeah, a lot of their arguments involved how women were more empathetic, better at sensing the truth, more domestic. So it's like they were using those arguments to get women on the jury as well. Right.
I mean, when you look at the way that the defending attorney versus the prosecutor, the way what they're looking for, it's very much those two types of arguments, like very split of like, oh, they're going to be too liberal, or they're going to be sympathetic. So let's do these things, type of thing in that conversation. Which honestly is why I was shocked that you were picked.
I'm still like, which one picked me? I don't.
Right. I doubt it was the prosecution, to be honest. Anyway, moving on.
They were the ones that were asking me the questions.
All the
about
the true crime.
Yes.
You know, though, I think that could be a conversation that we looked into, because like true crime people, are they more likely to be sympathetic or like more likely to convict because they're scared?
She asked me, like, are you able, which they ask something like this in every juror, but she asked me something that was different slightly, where she was like, can you look at evidence and you're looking at the evidence and not for the story.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Huh.
I don't know. But the state, she was like, no questions.
She already had you on a list, whichever it may have been. I have a feeling it was like, no. I'm just this is my own like thought process. Anyway, however, it wasn't until 1975 in the case Taylor versus Louisiana that the Supreme Court ruled that excluding women from jury duty was illegal because it didn't fulfill the requirements of choosing from a fair, accurate representation of the population guaranteed in constitutional amendments. However, this did not stop lawyers from preemptively using strikes against women to keep them off juries. Obviously.
Yes. Right. Until 1994, when the Supreme Court once again made a ruling, this time that these gender-based strikes violated equal protections provided by the 14th Amendment. But still, courts were caught doing it anyway. Even though a 1986 case found that prosecutors could not use race in preemptive strikes against a potential juror. In the early 1990s, Alabama courts were exposed for striking Black women specifically from jury selection, and some of the official reasoning was literally, quote, because she's a woman. And of course, again, race has been and continues to be a huge issue when it comes to jury selection, but also systemic racism in our justice systems and society. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg spoke about the importance of having women serving on jury duty in one of her last appearances as a lawyer for the ACLU. She argued that it marked women and their contributions as lesser, and that without women, they were, quote, diluting the quality of community judgment a criminal jury trial provides.
From the Michigan Journal of Gender and Law, they say divergent life experiences may also create reliable gender differences in response to criminal jury trials. In the United States, women experience higher rates of sexual assault, which may influence their perceptions of the evidence in sexual assault cases and their predisposition to empathize with victims of such assaults. Likewise, the experiences of pregnancy and childbirth, as well as the expectation that women take primary responsibility for childcare, may lead women to consider that children are in their domain of control and to uphold values of concern and care for children.
Yes, and as I'm looking at the time as we record this, I think I'll talk about my experience on a Monday Mini. Okay. But I will tell you that whole idea of like prove beyond a reasonable doubt, the reasonable doubt, that does depend on your experience. And then there were some different, people had different viewpoints on the reasonable doubt. So I think this is really important. The quote goes on, the evidence bears this out. In sexual assault cases, the gender of jurors has routinely been associated with case-relevant judgments. It is linked to the likelihood of jurors blaming sexual assault victims and believing damaging rape myths, which in turn influence final verdicts and proposed sentences. Women are significantly less likely than men to believe rape myths. Rape myths may include statements or beliefs such as, she asked for it, it was not really rape, he did not mean to, she wanted it, the rape, she lied about the rape, and the rape is a trivial event. In the context of rape perpetrated against a woman by a man, these myths can serve to undermine the gravity of the sexual assault, minimize the male rapist's personal responsibility, and discredit and blame the female victim. Relatedly, women serving as mock jurors have been found to empathize more with sexual assault victims than men do, providing higher ratings for victims' credibility, believability, and truthfulness. Experimental research shows that women jurors are more strongly and frequently able to take the perspective of, believe, and empathize with a sexual assault victim than their male counterparts. And some studies have indicated that having women on the jury in sexual assault cases leads to increased conviction. And I think we see this in famous cases today. There's, I'm sure, plenty of examples that you can come up with off the top of your head where people have been like, oh no, I didn't believe her. And I have to say, I was outside of another courtroom. I don't know what the case was about, but they were all saying she was too dismissive and I didn't believe I didn't believe her. I don't trust her. Like all of these things that we hear over and over.
Mm-hmm.
If you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, yes, it is a huge inconvenience for people who are full-time caregivers for children to do jury duty. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But the distinction was that it was women specifically that were designated as doing the childcare caregiving. Now, the general consensus is that women has been traded for person who is the primary caregiver to a child 6 years or younger, which people around me, when they were being interviewed, did use to say, I can't do jury duty. Quote, in criminal cases, research confirms that a juror's gender is associated with different views of defendant culpability and victim blameworthiness in sexual assault and child sexual abuse trials, resulting in distinct judgments in those cases. This distinction also emerges in capital cases. Women as a group are significantly less likely than men as a group to support the death penalty, which I have to say, before this started, I was told the death penalty is not on the table.
Huh.
But they made sure to...
Did they do a plea deal? Well, they couldn't have done a plea deal like that. Interesting. It's just the level of crime.
Because I think they had a question on there that was... They had a bunch of things that were like, I'm just opposed to this, like in general. And one of them was like, are you opposed to the death penalty? So I think they were saying like, it's not... You can't get out of it that way.
Or were they telling people who were like, I love the death penalty, they're like, calm down. This is not an option. Don't get too excited.
Yes. I think there were a bunch of things where I was like, I think there are two sides of this coin.
Yeah.
And one of them in here, there was a lot of questions about people and their thoughts about guns. But they picked a lot of people who were very pro-gun.
I'm sure.
Yes. Yes, I will talk about it. I'll wait for my Monday meeting, but I will talk about it. I will say, like, when I was looking up, present day issues other than our just justice system, but one thing I found when it came to present day issues with women, I mean, every article was like, what should you wear as a woman to jury duty?
Really?
What is appropriate to wear? And I was like,
wow.
There are dudes in shorts and hats. And
right. I've seen many a men in their like literal house farm outfits and a hat and their working boots, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm like, why are you telling women to dress up if men don't feel the need to do that either? A lot of them wear caps, and I don't think that's allowed. Like, legitimately in a courtroom, they tell you cannot have hats.
Yes. I will say they took it off for the courtroom, but there were many hats. I had to get out my old clothes. I had to find some clothes, man. I had to put on some real clothes. I had to look presentable. It's a whole thing. But also,
I used to get fancy. So when I worked in court for our trials, like we had to be all decked out. Like we would get yelled at. And it was for a little while we were told we couldn't wear pants, and we had to wear pantyhose. Yeah, like that was recently, y'all. The last 10 years, because I worked a lot into juvenile court. This is juvenile court, not even Supreme Court, not even like the level of felony courts. It's weird. What they expected. Like, that was not necessarily court, because court people, because there was different types of workers, court workers sometimes just gave no craps. They were like, nah, I'm in here every day. You can't make me wear.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Well, I would love, we'll talk about this in our upcoming jury duty.
I love that we're teasing this.
Yeah, please listen to it, because I got a lot to say. But one of the things that I was nervous for a lot of reasons, but I was really, really nervous because there were, I would say 4 or 5 dudes that were just like I just felt like they were going to yell at me if I disagreed with them. But I was so concerned. I was like, this is a responsibility and I have all these worries and all of this. It worked out fine.
Good.
But there were a couple of comments that I was like, ooh, we would not get along. But one of them, I think he was trying to make light of the mood because, again, it was a murder trial. He said one of the... I learned so much. They brought in like a forensic expert and a cell phone data expert and all this stuff. But they brought in a medical examiner. And he was like, she was so hot. She was smoking. And I was like, oh my God. She was talking about like a dead body, man.
And all he was thinking was, yeah, girl, I hit that.
It's like, wow. Okay. Let's
Did
move
anybody
on.
react? I need to know how people reacted though to that. Like, did people were like, yeah, or were they like,
it was an awkward, like, let's move on quickly.
I hope you learned a lesson. I hope you learned a lesson, dude.
Well, then he was trying to be like, she had a rash. She was nervous. And people were like, she probably was. It's court case. It is one of, even with like a case with barely anybody in the courtroom, to testify is unnerving. And even if you are, especially because you never know, some courts allow you to have documentation so you can read it off. Yeah.
Some will not. Some will take it from you and use it as evidence. Like you have so many stipulations that you don't understand, and different courtrooms do different things. Like I remember having to go into different courtrooms because I would work for the entire state and I have to go testify or something. And I'd be like, hey, what do they do? They're like, yeah, you can't. You can have notes, but that's it. Don't take anything that can be submitted to court because they will take it. And I was like, oh, okay. Let me know. Because like and it's to memorize and to know you have to do this, and that there is a chance that if you get it wrong, they're going to say you're perjuring and you're going to get arrested. It's nerve-wracking.
I would be terrified. I would have been terrified. And it was like, there were so many things that I think people see on TV, and they were trying to use it as like, see, something's off. And I'm like, no, she's nervous. They're just nervous. She's just nervous. Okay.
I'm glad you were there to be the voice of reason. Like, this is not a drama. They are not actors. This is what happens.
What would behoove her to lie to us?
But the thing about this is that whoever the witness is for, the person who's coming to do like the cross-examination, they will use that and say, that I think this is why, because it does work. I have had that where they come at me once again and they'll be like, you said this earlier and it was 10 o'clock at one point, now it's at 10:30. What is it? Are you lying to us? And I'm like, oh my God, I said around. I don't know. And then they will ask you that same question repeatedly. Like, this is true. Now, this has happened where they will ask you the same question repeatedly, thinking that they can trip you up.
Yeah.
And then that can get a little bit of doubt, and that's enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can't wait to talk about this.
I can't wait to talk about it either. I want you to talk about this.
This case had been tried before, and the previous jury was a hung jury.
Oh.
And it was the complete opposite of what we did, which shows you like what the lawyers took, and they were like adapted there.
Yep.
But one of the things is like the things they say at the top, their opening statements and closing arguments are not true. They don't have to be true. But people take it as must be true. They're saying it with authority.
Yeah.
Nope.
If they do it with enough drama and enough conviction, and they don't have to say, they will be like, but imagine if you did this and this was you. Would you have done? Like, they do things like that. They mess with you real hard.
Yeah, but that's when, like I said earlier, the judge was like, it's up to the jury. I hope you took notes. Like, oh no, I did take a lot of notes.
I got them. Were you the foreman?
No, the foreman actually was really cool. I didn't think I'd like him. I'll talk about it. But he looks like our friend Ramsey. He looked exactly like him. And it was throwing me off. Every time I saw him, I was like, and he said he gets that all the time, that he looks like somebody.
Somebody? Oh, that's funny. Poor dude.
Yes. Anyway, okay. It was another thing I saw when I was researching like current women on jury duty issues. What title does she answer to? What title does she use? Which I think is just like, let's retire that whole thing. conversation. Here's a quote. Ann Eisenberg studied 35 South Carolina death penalty trials and found that the defense used 41% of its strikes on women and 59 of its strikes on men, whereas the prosecution used 59 of its strikes on women and 41 of its strikes on men, a statistically significant difference. A follow-up study with more detailed information about the race and gender of the prospective jurors likewise confirmed these gendered patterns in prosecutors and defense attorneys' preemptory challenges. So yeah, that is still ongoing. I will say I also saw things I won't say I'm ashamed, but I will admit I felt it. That was about like how to stand up against angry men if you disagree with them in this setting. And it got heated. This got heated.
Really?
Yes. We deliberated for 7 hours and there were raised voices.
But they were able to give evidence and witness within like 3 days?
Yeah.
That's quick. That's a lot quicker than I thought they would have.
They kind of had one main piece of evidence and then no real witnesses other than they brought in the state had to bring in the experts to enter into evidence that this happened in Fulton County.
Oh, okay.
But I'll go all into it. Please check out my upcoming Monday Mini. But yeah, pretty much they did the evidence fairly quickly. It was like 2 days. It was 2.5. It was 1.5 days. And then we deliberated for 1.5 days, maybe more than that. But it got heated. I was really glad though, because it was mostly women that were really like, I strongly believe this. And it was women from all different backgrounds. And so I was really glad to have that because honestly, I thought I was going to have to be the only one that's like, because people joke about jury duty, you know, they don't want to have it. They just want to get done. It's a big inconvenience, which it is. You only get paid $25 a day.
Right.
But I was worried that I was going to be the only one that's like, no, I'm not willing to just say whatever to get out of to give a verdict.
Yeah. I'm not going to go with the majority just to get this over with.
Yes, which you're not allowed to do, but I'm certain people do it. And in fact, we got roll called at the end where you have to say, hey, no, I did.
So they did a polling. Yeah.
They did a polling where the prosecution asked, like, did you come to this conclusion? Do you agree with this conclusion? Like, there's no doubt. We all had to do it. So I'm really glad there were people that were very like, no, let's talk this out. And honestly, everybody was. But I'm glad that there were like 2 or 3. There were like 3 or 4 women, I will say, that were really. And we had them on opposite sides. It was good. Yeah. But okay, so there are obviously still a lot of issues with jury duty. One of the big things I ran into are courts grappling with non-binary, trans, and gender non-conforming folks. How does that look? And then obviously, as we've been saying throughout, racism just in the system. But I do think this experience for me was really enlightening. And I personally had a really good experience with my fellow jurors where we did.
That's good.
We did talk it out, even though it was really traumatic. But we did talk it out, and I do. Well, I feel like it was a really harsh punishment, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. But I'll talk about that in my Monday Mini. So yeah, I mean, I guess next time, you know, if you get jury duty or you get summoned, think about this and the fight people have had to get on juries. It doesn't mean there are not issues, because there are. And I believe our other podcasts, Stuff You Should Know and Stuff You Missed in History Class, have done episodes about some of those issues. So I'm not saying those don't exist, because they do. But people did fight for this right. And it is important to have a diverse jury, because I'm telling you, one guy, he was like, well, dudes just do that. And all the women were like, that's not a defense.
What? He actually said that out loud?
He said it out loud.
Wow.
So it is important to have all those perspectives, and especially for more marginalized communities to have those perspectives. But anyway, look forward to our Monday mini where Samantha and I will talk about our experiences. But in the meantime, if you have ever served on jury duty, or if you have any experiences working in this kind of setting, please let us know. You can email us at stephaniemomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast, or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I'll Never Told You. We have a TeePublic store, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks, as always, to our super producer, Christina, our executive producer, Maya, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.